Hello, beautiful people. My name's Kristen. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. I am going to delve into something that I have been thinking about for a number of years now. I am not a teacher, but I have many teacher friends. I am a Christian educator in the realm of the church, but I partner with parents and teachers trying to bring new thoughts and education and just thinking critically and humanely and world global viewpoints to the next generation. And as an avid reader, I am oftentimes thinking, oh, I wish particularly young people could read this alongside with some educated adults to have a discussion, see what they think. Enter the book. I think this is the best way. And again, I'm not a teacher, and I do know from dealing with my teacher friends here in the US, they have a lot of hoops to jump through and red tape they have to do and standards that take up so much of their time and energy that are outside of their gifting. And just on a side note, I'm not trying to be political. This has been going on for decades, which includes both parties. And honestly, we do not value our teachers enough, in my opinion. To me, it would be much better off if we would offer a very high salary and value to the educators and allowed them the space to do what they were talented and gifted to share, for them to pick out the literature or the, if it's math or sciences, those researches, those projects, those experiments, to be creative in those realms and to help this generation come up with what they're gifted at. And I think that would end us up not in the 40th position or whatever we are globally speaking in the education. So setting aside all of those political biases, as book people, because this is a book channel, and so just focusing on that. If you got to be a teacher leader, I want to know, I want this video to be a thought process of what books would you think you would have this next generation read. I'm specifically looking at the middle school level and then the senior high level of education. So having said those disclaimers and my strong value on teachers and acknowledging their current position that maybe they couldn't do this, but if you could, what would you do? So for middle school, I picked 5, and for high school, I picked 5, and this is just a starting point for me. It's just these are ones I've definitely thought of. They're not necessarily my all-time exclusive, but ones that would be great to start with. Night by Elie Wiesel. So this is the story of concentration camps of the Jewish people during the Holocaust. And this is told as an actual story of an actual survivor of a concentration camp and his struggle. It's small. It wouldn't be over daunting to a middle schooler reading it together. It is very heavy in obviously the content of it, but it's understandable, readable, and leads to a lot of other discussions that you could have about history and humanity, and even dipping into grouping people into racial issues. So that one definitely kind of along those lines, but even more kind of modern history. And I'm not saying this is a literary work, but it's an easy read. Wendell Pierce's The Wind in the Reeds. And this is a story about a particular neighborhood in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina gets wiped out, and they are rebuilding their city and dealing with a lot of the natural disasters, the historical history, if you will, of that part of the country, the political aspects of what's going on, some racial issues, as well as it centers around the performance of a particular play that kind of brings them back together. And that is Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, which I would also have them read, not exceedingly long, but very kind of powerful philosophical, and maybe this is a little heavy for middle schoolers, but I think that you could do it in a really fun, creative way and even set it up because they understand, or maybe they need to understand the concept of waiting. And so you have the backdrop of this natural disaster with a lot of frustrations and red tape and hard living conditions, which I would hope that students could start to grasp. And then you set it in this play that is, basically two people that are sitting there having a conversation, waiting, and they're waiting, and they're waiting, and, they're wrestling with the wait. And it just has so many layers. And I think it could just be really, really fun. You could come up with your own kind of inside jokes even with it. So definitely those two. Also, I would pull out at this point To Kill a Mockingbird. Definitely a classic that has, again, a lot of layers that you can go into talking about childhood and coming of age and the kind of weird neighborhood Boo character. Obviously, the racial tensions, very, very easy to go into this. And then to kind of round it off just in a thoughtfulness, how do we learn? How do we tell those stories? I would use On Juneteenth by Annette Gordon Reed. So this is an account of a woman who grew up in the Houston area, being taught a particular form of history of Texas and of the U.S. and of particularly, since this is on Juneteenth, which is the date for the 19th of June, which is the date that there was freedom and the lifting of all slavery in the United States. So, or I should say the last state, being Texas, declared it. So that was kind of the finale of the freedom of the slaves in America. So, but how we're taught that and how we discuss it. So I just think it's a really great discussion to have. Like, how are you taught anything? Not even just history, but how are you taught anything, right? It's a really good reminder even to us as adults. How are we getting our information and learning? And should we look at all sources and background? It's even being a religious educator, it's like, have you gone back to the Bible and the scriptures, or are you just listening to the interpretations or the people that are themselves supposedly reading it and dialoguing with it? The more we can have different perspectives, the more we can go back to the source facts, the more we can go back and say, oh, here's the documents, or here's the journals, or here's the diaries, or the firsthand accounts. All of that is really helpful just to form our own opinion. And I think that's the best gift that we give in education, is to get people thinking for themselves, not to be told what it is they should think, but here's the facts. What do you wonder about? What do you think these people dealt with? What do you think those who were going through it felt at the time? How do you think that would affect today, or if that happened today? All of these kind of good questions, all those good essay questions that we had in school, right? So moving on to the high school level, you can get a little more intense, a little more, not necessarily graphic, but detailed of some of the hardships of this world. I have read so many books that have to do with the wars, have to do with the fallout of just conflict in the world. And one of the ones that I have felt is the most, it's graphic and gut-wrenching, but it's not over the top for what the subject matter is. And that is All Quiet on the Western Front. This is Eric Maria Marquis. So I think this book just really nailed it as far as bringing humanity to those who are having to do the fighting versus struggling with the greater causes, with why is this happening, with the realities of war. And I would hope that in the end, students could come out with a sense of, in the brokenness of this world, there has been these wars, and there have been situations where war was the only way to move forward, and yet these things are so difficult that we need to do everything in our power to not get to that point. We need to do everything in our power to salvage peace and to fight for the goodness of community. So that's the kind of thing I would go for with that. Now, I am personally a major fantasy sci-fi kind of geeky nerd, so I would absolutely use Ray Bradbury, and I know a lot of people use Fahrenheit and some of his other classics, Something Wicked This Way Comes, but to me, I adore The Illustrated Man. It's this tattooed dude, and he encounters this other guy who's like, asking him about his tattoos. And so each one tells a story of maybe a political angst about fear of alien invasion, talking about the technology that's coming up and maybe the pros and dangers of such technology. And so this is an older book, right? And Ray Bradbury's talking about things that are pretty much happening now, or into our near future. And so I find that this would be a brilliant way to break down even lots of multiple discussions of each of those, and then the end kind of twist that the whole man who has these tattoos is this mysterious kind of anomaly that we get to enter into a twisty plot at the end. I'm trying not to spoiler it, but I just think this would be absolutely so much fun to do with students and to have these conversations. And I think it's well written. I'm a fan of Ray Bradbury. Then I am also a theatrical kind of person that loves theater, and I would love to even reenact some of it with my students, just to kind of continue to enter into the stories even more deeply. And a couple of those I would definitely want to teach is Bernard Shaw's St. Joan. So this is obviously going to also teach a lot of history of Joan of Arc, and talking about crusades, talking about some of that harder world history, going into the hierarchy of how powers were, maybe even comparing them and contrasting them to the way they are currently. And, just be doing it with some drama and maybe some even costumes, or, pictures of historical relics. All of those kind of things could really just make this come to life and be really, really meaningful. And then another one that my favorite copy got packed away, but you got to do some William Shakespeare. And I would personally do Midsummer Night's Dream. I know this isn't as literary, or, and I mean, if I have time, some Macbeth or some Hamlet, I would be down with too. But Midsummer Night's Dream, I think, would be so much fun, because it's still, even though it's a comedy and it's whimsical, it also does teach about values. It teaches about choices. It teaches a thought process of why are we drawn to or attracted to the people and the things and the adventures that we're attracted to. How do the sprites and the fairies of this world tempt us, kind of thing. And I just think this would be absolutely brilliant. It has a lot of parts. You could assign most of your class, or come up with some extra parts for to cover everybody. So I just think that would be absolutely positively brilliant. And finally, for the senior high level, I would do a Black History Month about combining some short but powerful reads. I would love to do the narrative of slave Frederick Douglass. I would love to explore Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, as well as going through and using both of those. Read those two ones first, and then follow up with Between the World and Me, probably going in not just February, but March and April as well. This is Ta-Nehisi Coates' story that is nonfiction, letter to his son about what it is like to grow up a Black man in the United States, which talking about, Frederick Douglass in the colonial slavery days experience versus Martin Luther King's civil rights protests to modern day, what is it currently like? And not politicizing it, but just trying to pull out the facts, what actually happened, and then what do students think about that, and what do they think happened? I wonder what it would be like, those kind of questions, and just coming up with their own decisions. So those are mine. Now, I had started this whole thing. I had asked one of my BookTube friends, Brian at Bookish, who I know is a teacher, what would you pick or teach? And he says, oh, this is a great question. You should do this video and make it a tag. So I said, that's a really fun idea, because there's a lot of people I want to know. And anybody who wants to do this, please do this. Please tag me so I can see the video, because again, I just spend a lot of time thinking about this and dreaming about this. So I'm tagging Brian at Bookish to officially do this. I'm also tagging my friend Shelly at Shelly Swearingen, who is a teacher. I also want to tag a couple of my friends who are outside the United States, because it's not just limited to the US, right? So I want to tag my friend Jolene at Bookworm Adventure Girl in Canada. I want to tag Jack at Spread Book Joy in UK. I want to tag my friend Berna in Turkey, and just have this dialogue start. I just want to hear and explore and just be thinking if you can pass on to the next generation a fun kind of way. I mean, let's be real. We're also trying to educate a generation to love books, to love reading, to love learning, to grow and to be better off than they were. Because even if I read a book and enter it into a book that I strongly disagree with the message, I disagree with the author, if they still did it in a thought-provoking way, I usually end up better off for having encountered the book, even if I didn't enjoy the process, because I have been exposed to another way of thinking or another viewpoint. I mean, there isn't too much downside in exploring our world throughout the fun ways of reading books. So leave me a comment, either what book you think you should have, you'd pick to teach, or drop me a comment or tag me for a video. I will see y'all later. I hope you have happy reading that sparks lots of conversations about learning and just sharing that love of learning. Y'all have a blessed day. Take care.